Hello everyone. My name is Rick. As you can see, I'm here at home and not at the conference. I'm here today to talk with you about financial aid. I work in the NTID admissions office. I'm not a financial aid person, but I have seen quite a bit in working with families over the last 13 years that I'd like to share with you. So we only have 20 minutes, so there's going to be a lot of information to share with you in that short amount of time. I want to emphasize that I'm coming to you from a neutral perspective and as a parent. I have one child who just graduated, another going into their third year, and then one that will be attending school this coming fall. And so the experiences with each of my children has been very different. Federal and state funding has decreased over the last several years. However, colleges are working hard to help families to meet their financial need, but it's so important to really look at the math because each individual family situation is very different, even compared to what it used to be. In the past, a child might be able to do a summer job and be able to pay off whatever financial loans they might have accrued. However, we live in a new time. Just like most people have a car payment, many people also have college loans to pay off. Now, you want to keep in mind to be reasonable. You don't want to borrow the same amount that you would borrow to pay off a house. Now, as I mentioned, coming to this from a parent's perspective, my oldest daughter, when she applied to colleges, she applied to 6 different schools, and different schools charge different tuition rates. And I know that times are different. As my daughter went into college, she didn't know what expenses would cost because we paid everything. I remember her first year of college, she called me and said, "Oh man, Dad, toothpaste is so expensive." $3 wouldn't have meant anything when she was still living at home, but out on her own, those expenses really add up quickly. I want to talk a little bit about vocational rehabilitation. In the past, many people have been able to rely on that for college funding. However, those days are very different now. You have to look at the different possible funding sources to be able to see whether you'll truly be able to attend college or not. Now, I don't want to make this into a horror story, but it is very important to compare schools because things are not what they used to be. I want to share some definitions about financial aid and financial need. Financial aid and financial need are very different. So your financial need is what you need to be able to pay to cover the cost, and your financial aid is the assistance that you will be able to receive to cover that need. Now, your need is usually comprised of 3 different components. It could include merit scholarships. For example, if you work really hard in school, you may be able to catch a really good deal to be able to cover a merit scholarship to cover some of those costs. It takes a look at your family resources. There are need-based scholarships or grants, and that's based on your family's household income. And then there are also additional grants that can be need-based as well. Lastly, there are loans, which is money that you would borrow and then have to repay. You may be able to get a loan from a family member or a private loan or a personal loan. Now, the financial aid perspective may be very different from a family perspective. In the financial aid perspective, you'll be able to see here on the slide, it takes a look at the cost of attendance, or COA. Now, the federal perspective is based on the FAFSA, and it takes a look at what they feel that your family should be able to afford, and that's called your EFC, your expected family contribution. When you apply to a school, you'll receive something describing what that EFC is, and you may be able to cover all of those costs, which would be great. Very rarely will a school be able to help you to meet the total cost. So you want to take a look at what you can afford. If you're able to afford, let's say it's $8,500, then that's great. Sometimes you might have something where it says your expected family contribution is 0, but this is what or 100,000. So this is what the federal government's perspective is on what your family can contribute to your college expenses, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Now, what you really want to do is to look at the net cost. So I compare this to the sticker price. You look at what those total costs are and what you will have to pay out of pocket. And the way that you figure that out is to look at your tuition cost. Let's say it's $30,000. So that cost of attendance. Now that includes room, board, tuition. You also want to look at those gift aids, such as scholarships and/or grants. So again, let's say that gift aid comes to $22,000. So then what's left is that net price, which you will have to decide whether you will have to pay out of pocket or get loans for your child or for them to pay on their own. So I would refer to that as like your discount price, not what the sticker price is. So when you go to buy a car, you have that breakdown of all of those costs that you're able to then negotiate and come down to that net price. So before we dive in any further, I want to talk a little bit more about the FAFSA application process. Now, I want to emphasize that this focuses on your PPY. That's your prior year. So when you fill out your FAFSA, you usually pay your taxes in April, but schools make their admission determinations in May. So that puts you on a very close timeline. So the federal government decided to look at the prior year's tax returns because students often apply in October and they can now do that in October, and that gives you a little bit more time between October and May to make that determination, and that's based on the prior year's tax return. And as you all know, a lot can happen in 2 years. Your financial situation may change, you may lose your job, or like now we're facing the COVID crisis. So that PPY is just a snapshot of your financial circumstances. And in a couple of years, your circumstances may be very different. So if there are extreme circumstances, you can discuss that. And many families feel like there's a lot of pressure, or they feel that they don't want to take the time to fill out the FAFSA because maybe they think that their income is too much. However, I strongly encourage you to go ahead and fill out that FAFSA because you never know what may happen. Before I go any further, I'd like to go through the definitions of the cost breakdown. That way you'll know what's typically included in that cost of attendance and what those typical expenses are that all schools will charge. So with the cost of attendance, that doesn't always include everything. So I strongly encourage you to look at the math. You'll see there on the right column the direct charges, tuition, room and board, and student fees. Now, those student fees can vary depending on the school and the program. They could be anywhere from $400 to $4,000. Now, those are your direct charges. On the other column, you'll be able to see what those variable charges are. So if you're a photography major or a psychology major or criminal justice, those charges can vary depending on the program, and you might not know that. Another thing that you need to keep in mind is transportation. Depending on where you live, how far away from campus you are, also some of those personal expenses. Some students need more than others and some need less. And they make estimates on that. So sometimes what you will get as your expected cost may vary depending on what they estimate. Whether you eat out a lot or you need a lot of money for recreation or a personal computer, those fees may vary. Another thing I want to caution you on is student orientation. Sometimes that happens early in the summer and other times that happens right before school starts. And there are fees that are associated with that that impact your orientation cost. So those are different fees that you want to take a look at when you receive your financial aid letter. And I encourage you to make sure that all of those costs are there. And if they are omitted, reach out to your financial aid office to see how much those charges will be. Now, taking a look at the order of financial aid acceptance, you always want to take the free money. That free money are those merit scholarships, awards. If you do well in school and you receive any merit scholarships or based on your household income, take advantage of that free money. Another thing that you might want to consider are the work-study programs. I know personally for one of my children, their financial aid letter mentioned $3,200 of work-study money. However, keep in mind that your child will have to work. Looking at my son, he's going to be a freshman this coming fall, and whether or not it would be a good idea for him to work during the fall semester is something to consider. Going into a new school and a new environment, it might not be the best idea. So taking into consideration that they're estimating $3,200 for the entire school year, and he may not work that fall semester, that removes $1,600 of that expected income that we'll have to consider when we're looking at the total cost. Also, you have to consider whether he'll truly be able to find a work-study job. So looking at those numbers, you then want to look at loans. Now, I recommend federal loans over private because there's more flexibility. There are lower interest rates as well as lower charges. Therefore, I consider those to be better than those private loans, which you're not able to negotiate on, or let's say you graduate and you're unable to find a job, you still have to enter repayment, whether you're able to afford it or not with those private loans. And those are offered by different foundations such as Sallie Mae. Those I would call your last resort option if you are unable to get any of the other funding sources. So that's what you want to consider as to whether you'll be able to afford to attend college or not. So I recommend looking at that free. Looking at that free money first. Now, as a recap, when we look at financial aid, you want to take a look at the total cost. I know that many schools are not able to meet your unmet need. Some schools have more funding and they're able to offer more assistance than other schools, so that's something that you want to take into consideration when you're choosing the school as to whether they'll be able to help you to meet that unmet need or not. So looking at that expected family contribution, what you have to pay out of pocket, whether that includes loans or let's say you have a wealthy aunt or uncle who might be able to give you a personal loan, and looking at all of the options. Looking at the total net cost and the expected family contribution based on the federal government's determination on what you can afford. Let's say they say your family can afford $8,500, but as a family, you know that you can't afford that. However, it's based on their formula, and that formula decides the family contribution no matter what school you attend. So you want to take into consideration how much a school will be able to add as far as additional assistance. You want to consider whether you want to accept the federal loans that are offered. I know sometimes I talk to families and they don't want to fill out the FAFSA because they feel like they will be forced to take those federal loans or personal loans. However, you do have the option to accept or decline. And if you decide to decline, you can look for other ways to make up the difference. So taking a look at that unmet need and applying for private scholarships. I also encourage you to work with vocational rehabilitation. Each individual school that you apply to is not going to be aware of any private scholarships you've applied for, so keep that in mind when you look at your financial aid letter, it may not include some of those private scholarships that you may have been offered. Now, it's not easy. It does require a lot of work, but it's well worth the work. Another point about the FAFSA and the PPY, or that prior year, let's say that you do lose your job, or you have some unforeseen health issue, or you have a child that attends private school, or some unexpected cost. You do have the ability to reach out to the federal government and let them know, or the financial aid office, and let them know that your circumstances are not what they were with your PPY. And it's not necessarily a negotiation, but it's an opportunity for you to be able to explain your current circumstances and for them to be able to make adjustments. I can't emphasize enough how important it is, though, for you to know about that cost of attendance and what the actual amount is. Take a look at those award letters. Let's say that something is missing, and for example, the orientation fee. When you're calculating those expenses, you may be unaware. So it's so important to make sure that you're aware of all of the costs that may be considered. The title of my presentation is Sweat the Details. And I really do mean that you really need to take a look at the math. So the best formula, look at that cost of attendance and what that total amount is, what free money is available, and then what is left, that unmet price or that unmet need. Also take into consideration the expected family contribution and whether you truly are able to do that, whether it's a family or friend loan as well as private scholarships, and see what the amount left is. After doing so, then you'll be able to determine whether or not you can attend a particular college or university or not, and you may have to choose another school. Now, I'd like to share a real-life example with you. Different schools have different financial aid letters. I am working in admissions, and even doing so, these financial aid letters can be very confusing. I sat down with my son. He'll be attending Cornell University this fall, and we took a look at his financial aid letter together, his financial award letter together. You'll notice there on the top left is the recreation or personal miscellaneous. That amount may be different for other students. Our family's not as wealthy as some students, so I don't expect that that amount will be that high for him. It also looks at the $5,800 that includes, or $58,000 for attending that school. On the top right-hand corner, it shows what our EFC is, what the federal government has estimated as being what our family can afford. They say that we can afford to pay $5,000. Being a single father, that's not reasonable for me, but that's what the numbers came out based on their formula. They also said that my son would be able to pay $3,100 on his own. Now, when I look at these numbers, true, he may be able to get a summer job, but that still seems like quite a bit. He does have some money in savings, but I'm not sure that he would truly be able to do that. It's not likely that he could get a summer job because of the coronavirus, and so that impacts those numbers. Like I said, it says $8,300 is part of our EFC. You'll see that there at the bottom. Now, when you look at the total of unmet financial need, you'll see the yellow arrow there on the top right-hand corner. It says 0. It says that our financial need is 100% met, but in reality, that's not so, because you'll see where those yellow arrows are, that there's really $12,400. You'll see that $8,300 in the right-hand corner, but really it's $12,400. Let me explain. On the bottom left-hand side, you'll see that it says fall, and then on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see the spring semester. Typically, they will have the total year's cost as well as each semester broken down. And so you'll see the numbers for the fall and the spring will match up to the numbers that you see at the top. So for the fall semester, they've estimated, well, for TAP, that's for the State of New York Tuition Assistance, you see $250. So that's free money, which is very nice. Below that, you'll see the Pell Grant, which is federally funded money to offer tuition assistance of about $2,100 for the year. Below that, you see a grant that has been given to him by the school. So it's basically like a scholarship, which is really nice. It's $42,000 of free money. Below that, you'll see an expected loan of $1,000. Keep in mind that that's $1,000 on top of the $8,200 that was already mentioned. And then there are outside scholarships where you see $750 per semester. And we think that we will be able to find that funding. And then below that, it says federal work-study program, which is free money of $2,600, which sounds nice. But again, I spoke with my son and I talked with him about whether or not he would really want to take a work-study job during the fall semester at Cornell University. It might be a possibility in the spring, so there's the possibility of $1,300, but that's something additional that goes into that unmet need that we have to look for that money to replace what they've estimated. So $1,300 for the work-study program in addition to the loan. So you can see how that really changes the picture very quickly. And you have to keep in mind too that every student's circumstances are very different. And when you look at the breakdown, you may have to decide to go with another school. When it talks about having a personal or private loan, you need to keep in mind that that's something that you will then have to pay back at a later date. And you have to find a loan in another place, like it did mention the $1,500 loan. So that's just one example of how you have to really dissect the numbers. And if you're unsure, please reach out to your financial aid office and they would be happy to explain the details to you. The second slide that I wanted to share with you is from the U.S. Department of Education. They call it their shopping sheet. I believe this started in 2011. Many schools' award letters looked very different, and when students apply to several different universities, it makes it very hard to compare. So the federal government decided to make it where it was standardized, where they were able to make a comparison from different schools. So let's say you apply to 6 different schools, you should get an award letter that looks the same to be able to make a comparison, to be able to see where the free money is, where the federal money is, and what additional costs would be left, whether that be from private loans as well as the estimated family contribution. Now, that is what all colleges are supposed to do, and that makes it very nice to be able to put them side by side and compare. But often they don't do that, so they are different. Some are more clear than others. So that wraps it up. When we talk about sweat the details, it really is important for you to do the math. I have my email address here on the slide. Please feel free to reach out and contact me. And again, I'm not a financial aid person, but I have seen a lot from my own experiences and working with many families. And we do know that there are other things that may pop up, and you want to make sure that you don't get surprised by any unexpected costs or have to leave school because you're not able to pay off your balance. Some students might think that they can have a remaining balance and then go ahead and transfer to another school. However, when you apply to another school, they'll want to have your transcript sent to them, and a previous college will not send your transcript if you have any unpaid balances. So they might even turn that unpaid debt into a collection agency, and there are so many possible potential impacts that could affect you for the rest of your life. So thank you for your time.